One of the hottest years on record. It was among the hottest years recorded.
The hottest year on record.
Another hot year. Global warming. What will we do about that? Politicians from most every country promised to deal with it by signing something called the Paris Climate Agreement.
A historic climate agreement in Paris.
But when President Trump took office, he said,
"The United States will withdraw."
What? We will withdraw? We alone?
President Trump isolated the United States with his reckless and indefensible decision.
My neighbors in New York agree with that. And so do most of the media.
A lot at stake, potentially, for the planet.
Really? I bet they don't even know what was in the agreement. I didn't.
Paris Accord was somewhere between a farce and a fraud.
Manhattan Institute senior fellow Oren Cass is one of the few people who've actually read the Paris Agreement and also the commitment sent in by every country.
You don't even have to mention greenhouse gases in your commitment if you don't want to. You send in any piece of paper you want, we're going to staple them all together, and we're going to call that the Paris Accord. Everyone sent in a piece of paper, and they stapled it together and held it up and said, this is amazing.
China has made a major commitment.
So what's in the commitments that every country made?
India has ratified the Paris Climate Accord, committing the world's fastest growing economy to limit carbon dioxide emissions.
What you find is they either pledged to do exactly what they were already going to do anyway, or pledged even less than that. China, for instance, said, we pledge to reach peak emissions by about 2030. Well, the United States government had already done a study to guess when Chinese emissions would peak, and their guess was about 2030.
Peak doesn't mean stop, it just means stop increasing.
That's right. So in fact, China promised they will continue increasing their emissions for some time to come.
And yet,
China was actually one of the better pledges. India made no pledge to limit their emissions at all. They pledged only to become more efficient, but they proposed to become efficient less quickly than they're already becoming more efficient. So their pledge was to slow down. You know, my favorite was Pakistan, whose pledge was to reach a peak at some point, after which to begin reducing emissions. And so you can staple those together and you can say we now have a global agreement, but what you have is an agreement to do nothing. And if anything, you've gone backwards, because whereas in the past you could have criticized countries and said, hey, why aren't you doing anything? Now we have an agreement that says, in fact, we will applaud you for doing nothing.
We came together around the strong agreement the world needed.
Obviously, President Obama got a lot of political mileage out of that, but the climate didn't get much at all. The one country that showed up in Paris with a very costly, ambitious target was the United States. So President Obama took all the zero commitments from everybody else, but threw in a really expensive one for us.
Super expensive. Obama pledged to reduce American emissions by a quarter. Of course, it's true that the United States produces twice as much greenhouse gas per person as China and India. So isn't it on us to do more?
Even if we zeroed out our emissions tomorrow, the future of climate change is still a question of what happens in China and India.
We're getting out.
When Trump said he was leaving the Paris Accord, he was trashed by politicians across the world.
I'm dismayed at the U.S. decision to pull out of the Paris Agreement.
President Obama said, this administration joins a handful of nations that reject the future.
If the future is worthless climate agreements that everyone goes to Paris to talk about, then first of all, that's a very sad future, and it's one that we should be proud to reject.
The Earth is warming. Man may well be increasing that. But the solution isn't to waste billions by forcing emissions cuts here while other countries do nothing, while pretending to make cuts. Trump was right to repudiate this phony treaty. Most of us didn't even know how phony it was. But now we do.